to Nelson, and then Marlborough. And then you're starting to move down into the area called North Canterbury. So the move of Marlborough south and the move of Canterbury northwards, I think they'll never touch, but there's definitely, you know, the two bits are coming together, if you like, well, mainly driven by Marlborough extending further southwards. But when you look at North Canterbury there, that's taken from Black Estate. So if we were in New Zealand now, we'd be standing in the restaurant, which is an awesome restaurant. Behind us would be hills, and then if we climbed up and over the hills, we'd go into the sea. And as we look down there, in the distance, they're the Southern Alps. So the hills that you see in the background, well, they are the mountains that form the spine of hills, mountains running up the centre. Hay fever season, sorry. Which run up the South Island. So if you get a chance to go, North Canterbury, I think, is well worth it. So next one, please, David. So it's only small proportion of New Zealand production is only 2%, because up until recently, I think it's only about now an hour's drive north of Christchurch, which would be the biggest city in the South Island. And up until now, there was a sort of the main arterial road we talked about, State Highway 1, would come down from Blenheim all the way down the coast and then through Christchurch and then continue down through Dunedin until it got to the bottom of the South Island. But they have put in a new expressway that takes you from Christchurch up to North Canterbury. And it takes now about maybe 45 minutes to an hour. So that has made it a much more viable destination for people who live in Christchurch, you know, for sort of lunches and, you know, the expansion. The airport's kind of to the north of the city, or if not exactly to the north, there's an easy access onto that expressway. So now it means that you can kind of maybe fly into Christchurch, hire a car or get on a tour and be in North Canterbury quite quickly. So although it was always one of New Zealand's, you know, long-established regions, until recently it was kind of one that people overlooked, if you like, because there was no real reason to go there unless you were kind of travelling north. Maybe you're going to catch the ferry back to the North Island. But that, I would say, expressway has opened up the area. The other thing is, because it didn't really necessarily have the profile of, say, Central Otago or Marlborough, it was possible to buy properties that maybe have been established by somebody else, or, you know, the person decided, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. So it's kind of been a bit of a magnet for new people to come in, or younger winemakers who want to experiment or do something else. So the Black Estate one that you saw there was set up by somebody else, and then unfortunately their partner passed away quite quickly, and so they sold it so new people could come in. So there's been a kind of regeneration, I think, of the region. It's always made kind of smart wine, but suddenly it's become quite an in vogue, if you like. It's not, as you can see, not a particularly big region, but it's definitely one to look for. And when you come further south, when you scroll down, okay, I keep forgetting there's more than one picture of these. So the first thing to point out is that the region of Canterbury is huge and extends all the way up to touch Marlborough. So the bit that's sort of sticking out, if you look at the big, long, kind of oval shape of the region, then there's a bit that sticks out. That's the Banks Peninsula. And where that sticky out bit meets the main bit of the country, if you like, that's where Christchurch itself is. So Canterbury actually extends a great deal past that. So this is a sort of you can see on that picture on the right-hand side where you've got those Southern Alps we talked about in the background. And then this massive plain of land means that it's super flat, super fertile. You're protected from many of the prevailing weather systems coming from across the Pacific. So it sort of sits in a rain shadow. So in the summertime, drought is not unusual there. They get these fierce northwester winds that come, sort of warm and dry ones that dry all the soil out. So sometimes it can be quite an extreme climate. So it's much drier. And where that navy, sort of dark blue outline of the region is, then obviously that's bordered by those southern Alps. Well, if you go over the Alps, the very thin piece of grey that's to the left-hand side, which is where I'd like to live, is one of the wettest places, well, I think, in the world, to be honest with you. So they take all the rainfall and then up and over the Alps, and then Canterbury, Canterbury lamb comes from there, so there's lots of sheep. More, unfortunately, dairying when they put in that intensive systems where they have those, irrigation spirals that go around and cows walking around in groups. When you go into it a little bit more, then you'll see that it was, so the Banks Peninsula is where French people landed, French settlers, so places like Akaroa out in Banks Peninsula. Then there's Christchurch, which is in a kind of basin. But really, there were some vineyards further south, so there are people sort of hobbyist vineyards and what have you. But really today, the Waipara Valley that you see, which is North Canterbury, which takes out all the rest of Canterbury, is where most of the great, or the premium producers are. The ones further to the south, I think, have just sort of given up, to be honest with you. There's not really very much point in being there. And so if we go down to the little bit further, we can see the next one should be a sort of a dive into that particular one. Aha, voila. So when you look at that, the thing to remember about this region here is geologically, it's super active. So in the top of the picture, just before you go off at the very center at 12 o'clock, it says Hanmer Springs. So Hanmer Springs is a sort of spa place, and it's a spa place because the movement of the plates, it's super active here, has released kind of hot springs and whatever. So they're, naturally occurring warm springs, 60 degree, up to 60 degrees are there. So that became a sort of place there's a great big hospital. Well, there was a great big hospital. It's kind of Victorian and fallen by the wayside. People would go there to take the waters and sort of recover. So that will be, nowadays, it's into the Alps. So people are go skiing, or there is rather a sad little winery there, like one of those people who's thought, well, let's have a winery in the middle of nowhere, and nobody buys the wine, and we can't sell it. But anyway, we'll worry about that later on. If you come down from there, then you see it says the Waiau, no, sorry, the Waiau River. So there, that is where they had an earthquake about probably 6 or 7 years ago now, and the whole town disappeared. But you can see the sort of uprising, the flat, the up, the down. It's extremely active region. And what that has meant is that you've got all these different soil types. So if you look at it, then you would see on the left-hand side, a sort of 2/3 of the way down the picture, it says Waikari. So Waikari is its own little region, and you'll see to the left, it says Pyramid Valley. Well, so there are a number, probably two of the most high-profile New Zealand wineries are there. One is called, strangely, Pyramid Valley, which was set up by a slightly tragic figure who wanted to make the world's greatest wines, and set up this amazing vineyard, quite a small vineyard, and everything was the best of everything. Well, the winery was like a shed, but it was all beautifully laid out, and he was very philosophical about the whole thing. But unfortunately met, again, a sort of sad demise, because he, I think, for various reasons, he's not there any longer. But alongside it would be a winery called Bell Hill. And Bell Hill is owned by one of the Geeson brothers. So you must see Geeson Sauvignon in New Zealand, in Australia. And it's their own, so 3 brothers, and this is Marcel's own project. So he and his partner have got an incredible property there. It's not open to anyone. They only grow Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. They are obsessive. And what drew the 2 different people to that region was limestone. So even though at some point New Zealand was underwater and then it's all risen up, most of our soils aren't pure limestone, but they are out in Waikari. So it's a very geologically important area. People are always tripping up over moa bones. Moas are great big, looks like fat turkeys, and whatever. But that's a really unusual small region that sits apart, kind of more recent region, but an important region, not in size, but in the context of New Zealand wine. if you were to look back at the sort of coming further south, then the Waipara Valley takes in really from Glasnevin, which is in the bottom, through the little town of Waipara, and then to Omahi, which is north. So the Waipara River is coming along, draining out of the Alps, coming along the region and out into the sea. So gravel soils have been deposited on the Glasnevin gravel. So when you see things like Pegasus Bay, they plant Cabernet Merlot, which doesn't look like a natural fit, to be honest with you, in North Canterbury. But they've used the free draining soils. We know that Cabernet and Merlot like to be grown somewhere where the free draining soils allows them to ripen. So you see wines coming from there. But if you go north, then at Omahi, then you see much more clay-based soils, really quite steep viticulture, people growing Pinot Noir and growing Chardonnay there as well. So there's kind of three different regions, if you like: Glasnevin gravels, Omahi clays, and then the limestone in Waikari. So there's kind of three different regions. I think I put some photos on as well, just for something. Oh, hang on. So the North Canterbury people have come up with this map, which I'm happy to send you, David, a sort of high resolution version, if everyone would like a copy of it. But there, they've done it by limestone. Oh, sorry, by soil type. So when you look at that one, the Glasnevin gravels, which are the great big sort of orange area at the bottom, the road that goes along sort of from sort of east to west along the top of that big orange kind of part, then there's lots of, there are some wineries along there, and a lot of them are on terraced vineyards. So things like the Bone Line, who else is along there? Oh, there's hundreds of ones with Waipara in the name, like Waipara West and Waipara Springs and West Waipara and stuff like that. But they're all there. South of there, those gravel soils are where, if you drive there, you'll see lots of big vineyards. It's where some of the bigger companies went in to plant things like Pinot Gris. There's some Sauvignon there because, it's flat. They put in great big frost fans to cope with it, but that it's not necessarily they thought, oh look, this is a great place to grow things like Pinot Gris or Sauvignon, but it afforded them relatively inexpensive land, that they could plant, and then maybe blend it in with other things. When you go across the Waipara River, then you'll see that past Waipara, then all those little yellow bits all the way up are those clay loams. So people like Black Estate, Greystone, Muddy Water, they would be on the yellow that goes up as you follow the state highway up to the north. And then if you were to go up at 11 o'clock, then you would go up and then you cut through the Weka Pass. So Wekas are birds, and it goes up and through, and then you see Waikari, which is sitting on its own. And then, as I say, there's some limestone up there. So the more I think that regions do this kind of thing, maybe the better it is. I think, it's sort of a exploration of what's gone on. Thank you. If you keep on going, then Pinot, Sauvignon, Riesling, Pinot Gris, Chardonnay, the usual. And of course, coming up, smiling, the 20 other things nobody can remember. So, Pegasus Bay would have, they would have Muscat. I think they've got some Chenin Blanc. There's there'll be somebody planting something somewhere just to prove that they can do it. But Pinot is what they're best known for. And I would think most of that Sauvignon, as I say, is probably harvested, put in a tanker, taken directly up to Marlborough, which is probably 4.5 hours away, and then gets blended into Marlborough to make the bigger blends, the ones that are maybe not, you get 50%, can't you, without saying anything. So that would be there. And then for those people who like it as a pie chart or whatever that chart's called, voila, same thing. Apparently some people like to look at pictures. So North Canterbury is what it's most famous for. So as I say, low rainfall, and that is really exacerbated in the summer. So I talked to Nicholas Brown, who owns Black Estate, for a vintage report, and he said this year was so weird because by the time it gets to summer, they would be seeing all of the paddocks brown. They would be seeing it looking dry, those hot northwester winds coming down. But this year, in 2023, they didn't have that because obviously we were, struggling with the remnants of the cyclone. rainfall in the growing season, pretty small. And then, as I said, the gravelly deposits on the river, and then limestone plays up into those coastal hills and into Waikari. So again, I think there's a very distinctive style. I don't think you're going to find cheap wine coming out of Waipara. There was in the past a little bit. People like Mudhouse got some wine from there, but now I think the reputation of the region is on this sort of high-end premium, if you said to me North Canterbury Pinot Noir, that's what I would see it as. Sorry, David, I promise you by next time I will have mastered this wretched things. So that is a Black Estate vineyard. So I think that's damn steep. So you can see very, very classic New Zealand picture. So, cover crops. You'd never see a vineyard here with soil, I don't think. And then coming down, and then pockets of forestry around, and then the very far back you can see the Southern Alps in the distance. But that is quite, by New Zealand standards, that is quite a steep vineyard. And then I think I put some other ones in, which is just too cherry. That is Black Estate, so you already saw it on the picture from the restaurant, and then again. So I think it's a beautiful region. It's so pretty. It really, really is. Now that's Pyramid Valley. So it's been bought now since the passing of Mike. Then it's been bought by, so Steve Smith set up Craggy Range on behalf of the Peabodys, and now he's bought Pyramid Valley with the help of I think he's the 30th richest man in America or something, somebody who's developed some software we can't live without. So you see there, it's all beautifully set out. I mean, in the summer when we were there that was November, I was taking those photos, and you would be out for maybe 20 minutes and you'd be red as a berry. So, the sun is intense when you're there. So that obviously allows the fruit to ripen. It may not be super hot, but it's super intense sunshine. Or even more. Oh, now that's Bell Hill. So Bell Hill, the density of planting there could be some of the vineyards up to 11,000 vines a hectare. So if you think that in Marlborough they're 2,500 vines a hectare, maybe in someone like Burgundy 7,000 or 8,000, Champagne 8,000 to 10,000, but here 11,000. So that is incredibly steep vineyard and super tight vine rows with this focus on supreme quality. So Marcel and Sherwin, you can't buy the wine. It's on allocation only. You're going to be on the mailing list for 300 years before you get a bottle of it. But it just shows you that this is the kind of region where people can do, it's not like Marlborough where people are, you wouldn't get people doing this, let's put it that way. It would be hopeless, but they do it then. I think I've got one more, which is sort of non-wine. Oh no, there's the limestone, the pure limestone. That's at Bell Hill as well. So that shows you the vines going into it. I think there's one more, which is the bone line. Oh, there's me taking a photo of a dinosaur's tooth. So, which I thought, wow, that is the shark's tooth. So when I said to you there were some vineyards, and then in the background is the Waipara River, then the vineyards fall off super steeply, and you can go exploring for things. So at some point it would all have been under, what's that thingy called? It would have all been under water. So that's a winter picture. So you're straight into the Alps. So, Chardonnay is there, Pinot is there. And again, I hate those regional overarching things, because you could go to somewhere like Pegasus Bay, and they've been there as long as anyone, and they have a very definite style. So Pegasus Bay wines are never shrinking violets. The Pinots are rich with lots of big fruit flavors, very generous. They have oak. They may be 14% alcohol. Their Gewürztraminer is opulent. Their Chardonnay is massive. Not massive California style, but there's loads of fruit, but, incredible Pinot Gris and whatever. So there, if you like, at the big end of town. But if you went to somewhere like Black Estate or Greystone, then you've got people doing lots of whole cluster Nicholas at Black Estate, then he doesn't believe in sulfuring, he doesn't believe in fining or filtering. He's quite happy for the ferments to take their own time, or, so you might end up with wines, Pinots are only 12.5%. So I don't think you can say, all of the wines we can't say that really in any region, can you? But I don't think you can say, when you go there, they're all in a particular style. The Greystone people, I should put the photo of that in, are unusual in that what they have done is they have made a vineyard ferment. So they have gone into the vineyard, picked the grapes, crushed them in the vineyard, put them in a big tank and left it in the vineyard. So it hasn't come into the winery. So it's picked in the vineyard and it is fermented in the vineyard. And strangely enough, it's called the vineyard ferment. But they said, well, we're going to see if the yeast strain, without taking it into the winery and picking up the other yeast strains from other parcels, let's see what happens. So I think that's interesting. So in Wypra, you've got Black Estate and Greystone, which are almost side by side. So Black Estate, as I say, they're kind of edgy, modern style you'd expect there. They've got Cabernet Franc, Chenin Blanc, the dreaded Pétillon Naturel, obviously, which would be whatever. Then Pegasus Bay are the sort of legacy producer, if you like, there. The Bone Line, who was sort of an underperformer for years, but have really come up with some amazing wines now. So they're one of those ones to watch out for, a great winemaker. And Breitelater, he's one of the new people. So in my opinion, again, off the record, I'm being recorded, aren't I? The very opposite of saying things, is that those are the wines where sometimes it's, to me, quite difficult to tell you where they come from, because they're more about production. So, the low intervention, no sulfur, you get that kind of slightly wild character. And he's doing some interesting, young guy doing some interesting stuff there. And then, as I said, over in Waikari, then you've got Pyramid Valley. Now, those were super hit and miss. I never liked those. I'm going to be honest. They are a sommelier's dream. They love them. They were in the background, but they were cloudy. The Pinots were like a weird garnet color, even when they were first released. One of them re-fermented. And I said to a friend of mine who's a sommelier, I said, look, I bought a glass, because he did a vineyard ferment, or he did a ferment of Pinot Gris, Pinot Noir, like this sort of slightly feral thing. And I thought, well, I may as well buy a glass. There's no point in bitching about these things without putting my money where my mouth is. And I texted the guy and said, look, it's all right. And he said, yeah, we only get about 2 glasses in every 3 back. And I was stunned. I was like, what? You get 66% of the wine is returned. And he's like, yeah, well, it's very hit and miss, as though that was how could I possibly not think that was normal? I'm like, well, do you only make, a third of your phone calls go through, or your computing was a third of the time? Anyway, but because the guy who owned it was kind of very romantic and bohemian, people always kind of believe what he said. But since the Smith and Chef have bought Pyramid Valley, they've got an amazing winemaker who used to be the winemaker at Escarpment when Larry McKenna owned it. He's an Australian guy, Hugh. He's brilliant. So he's gone there and kind of respected what they were doing, but kind of brightened it all up a bit. So the Pinots and the Chardonnays, I mean, they're pretty expensive, but they are amazing wines now. And then, as I say, Bell Hill, who've got the Chardonnay Pinot, and then they have a second, one tier down called Old Wecker Pass. So they're worth looking out for, I think. I would anyway. I would always try and choose a North Canterbury wine if I saw one on there. So then we go to Waitaki. So why another Y? Well, you can see how people find New Zealand just so, as the fourth, or is it Waipara, Waiheke, Waipara, Waikari, the Wairarapa, Waitaki. Do you know what I mean? You can't imagine how people think, oh, no, Lordy, not another one. So the Waitaki Valley is weird. So this is North Otago. It's not Central Otago. So Waitaki you'd see on the way. So look, it's teeny tiny. There's only 60 hectares there. It makes nothing. But in the moment of climate change, I think you might see wines from Waitaki suddenly becoming quite, well, they're not going to blossom, are they? They're not going to take over, but there's kind of promising things happening there. So it's, when you look at the picture, what's that thing called? The map, if we just whiz down, okay, there you are. So you've left Christchurch, which is that kind of knob sitting out on the perfect, thank you, David. And then you're going to travel down, and this would take you as though you were going on to Queenstown. So when you look at that, on the bottom right-hand corner, it says Oamaru. So Oamaru is famous for the limestone. So Oamaru stone is super highly regarded in New Zealand. We don't have many buildings made of stone, but it's kind of a white limestone looking stone. Makes beautiful kind of, if you go to Oamaru, the banks and stuff are built in that kind of thing. But if you showed this map to most New Zealanders, what they would tell you is that Kuro, which is in the very centre, is where the All Black captain was born. So Richie McCaw, that's probably all anyone ever knows about it, is the rugby player comes from there. But people who like gliding would know Omarama. I can never pronounce it. Omarama. Yeah, on the top left-hand corner. That's where all the gliding happens. So it's a super, super windy valley. That tells us everything we need to know. And the people who've gone to plant grapes there, can we just have a look at the next one, David, if that's right? Have gone there because they think, well, why not? You know, there's whatever. So you can see there the classic New Zealand picture. You've got the gravels and bits and pieces coming out of the hills, being washed down, hitting the flat land, and then being carried by those braided rivers out to the sea. So what it means is that it's cool. It is super cool there. You've got these beautiful limestone soils. But I would say when I first came here, there was somebody who set up a winery there, and I tried their Riesling, and I actually thought that my career as a wine writer was over, because the level of acidity, even coming, I know you do from Australia, where things like Clare Valley Riesling can be slightly challenging. That made Clare Valley, youthful Clare Valley Riesling look soft by comparison. This thing was absolutely shocking. Oh God, it was acidic. But climate change has happened. Some of the people who went in at the very beginning have gone. And so now you've got just the kind of diehards there. So the most famous person making wine from here is Grant Taylor, who owns Varley, which is down in Central Otago. And he comes from here. So he's planted Chardonnay. If you think about all the great vineyards of the world that produce Chardonnay, many of them are on limestone. So he's gone there. And then there's another winery down in Central Otago called Takano, and they're, you know, super wealthy people, and they've come into this region as well, sorry, miles away, the region as well, and are planting, and that's all it really needs. So Dave, who's their winemaker, has just been made the chairman of the Waitaki wine growers, and they're trying to, you know, pick it up. There's a cycle trail. You can cycle from coast to coast from here. So you get some, you know, sad people on bicycles whizzing up and down. But as I say, all the time I've been here, slightly older vines, there is climate change happening, and the sort of greater understanding of how viticulture in an extreme climate means that there's probably never going to be, again, another region that's super, you know, volume wise, but it is quite important. I just came back from Canada, and the wines we showed from Waitaki were, I think, well, the Greystone Vineyard ferment was, people were fascinated by, but the wines from Waitaki just looked amazing. You know, there's all that ethereal sort of lifted kind of character. So there's lots of, and some paid for reviewer gave one of the Chardonnays 100 out of 100, you know, go figure. So that put it on the map. Look, even in a marginal climate, even when it's hard to ripen things and sell things that people have heard of, such as Pinot Noir, there are still 10 weird things there. You know, that people are just, I don't know, I wouldn't know what it was, to be honest with you. But as I say, it's one to watch. You could be ahead of the curve here and have wines from Waitaki, and you'll be, you know, woohoo, sweet as a nut. I wonder what other is. I should find out, shouldn't I, what all these others are? I wouldn't know, to be honest with you, love. There's some Pinot Gris there. What else could you plant in a cool climate? Cabernet Franc. Now I remember what's there. There is Cabernet Franc grown there, and that's what the Tucano wine is all about. There you go. So there's one. They thought, we'll go to the Loire because obviously it looks like the Loire. I thought we'll plant Cabernet Franc there as well. So if you keep on zooming down a little bit, then the Waiteki. I mean, again, when you've only got like 2 inches of it, it's probably quite difficult to make generalizations. But cool climate, and then, as I say, those limestone soils. So you would get much more of that Pinot character that I personally like, which is that sort of slightly more lifted, not so chunky, acidity driving the palate, not tannin, potentially. So, but I mean, that also might be a feature of the fact that most people making wine there are focused on premium wine. There would be nobody making wine there that was sort of inexpensive because, why would you? But Varley have opened a wine bar there. So it's only open in the summer, but it does mean you might be able to get a glass of wine as you come out of the glider. And then you end up, into Central Otago. So Central is super high profile. When I travel overseas, say I come from New Zealand, people are like, Central Otago Pinot Noir. So it has really come from really nowhere, hasn't it? Has it? So when you look at and Farm Snow, so quite a big place. So, just over 2,000 hectares, making 3% in terms of production, 13,000 tons. So what I think they've managed to do in Central is, even if there are slightly less expensive wines coming onto the market, then people aren't aware of that, if you know what I mean. They, if you think about the second label, things like Rabbit Ranch or Roaring Meg from Mount Difficulty, they're still over $20 a bottle, $25. So they've been able to keep that premium edge despite, obviously growing in size. So when you look at is the map next? Yep. So we'll go with the on to thing, but you can see where it is. So obviously Central Otago takes an enormous area, which you see on the right there, but you see how enormous the area is. So it would be, sorry, we're going to go to the bigger map. Those ones are perfection itself. So when you look at the map, what do you think? You think that you've got the Southern Alps on the left-hand side. So, it's a ski area to begin with. So it's the only really semi-continental climate that we have. We're the only one that's not influenced by the sea. So what does that mean? It means cold winters. It means warm, short summers. They probably are one of the regions that has proper seasons. Like here in Auckland, we don't really get seasons, do we? It's like cooler and wetter in the winter and slightly warmer and wetter in the summer. But here, snow, spring, heat, leaves fall off, winter time again. It's an enormous region. So if I was to drive from Queenstown in the far left, well, it can take you in nearly half an hour to get out of wretched Queenstown because the traffic's so bad. But I would say Queenstown to Bannockburn, so going from Queenstown at 9 o'clock across the centre of the picture through Gippsland to Cromwell, is probably 45-minute drive through. But if you went Queenstown to Wanaka, that's probably a good hour if you go up and over the Crown Range, or an hour and a half if you go the long way around. From Wanaka to Cromwell is 45 minutes, and then Cromwell down to Alexandria, you see in the bottom, would be another 30 minutes. So it's a big region, is Central Otago. And so what they've done is, rather than be lumped all together, they have decided to make this sort of sub-regional, if you like. It's probably the most developed or recognisable of the regions in New Zealand for those sub-regions. So I think if you said to people, name me Hawke's Bay, people could probably go, Gimlet Gravels at a pinch, or they might say Te Awanga if they've been out there to the sea, for a picnic or something. But I think in Central Otago, people put the words on the labels, so Bannockburn, Northburn, Bendigo, Gippsland, they are on the label. So there's a much greater consumer recognition of the individual sub-regions. So if you look at the map there, then obviously Queenstown is the biggest town in the region and sits on that lake, that sort of zigzaggy lake you can see there, which is called Lake Wakatipu, and it sits there. So all of the airport is there, people fly into there, and then if you were to go north of Queenstown, then you would be up where it says Lake Hayes, which you can just see sort of just after 1 o'clock after Queenstown. That's sort of residential, but if you then hit the foothills of the Southern Alps, that's where all the ski fields are. So Queenstown, the biggest place. I remember flying in there in 1990, and I thought the plane was going to crash. I screamed like a baby because I thought we were in this tiny little plane which came down from Nelson, and I remember thinking, "Oh, I'm just going to die." It was like one of those Andes films where you thought we're going to eat everybody on the plane. But now I think, because I taught a lady who's in charge of air traffic control, I think Queenstown is now the most, what do you call them, like radar pinging systems in the whole of, I don't think in the world, but somewhere. So that you're the safest place to fly into, even though it's super hairy. You look out the window and you think, no, I'm actually going to touch a mountain. But in you go to Queenstown. Queenstown sits at about 350 meters above sea level. So you're sort of sitting there, tootling about, having a fun time. If you start to go right, then the first place, you start to go through a gorge. And so make all your phone calls before you hit the first one, which is Nevis Bluff, because then you'll never get any phone reception and you're... then who knows what will happen. So the Cowroe is the river that runs all the way from left to right through that gorge. And the first place that you meet is Gibbston. So they don't like it called Gibbston Valley. They like it to be called Gibbston. There is a winery called Gibbston Valley, but they're very clear on that. So Gibbston was one of the first places to be developed, not the first, but one of them, because people, I think, landed at Queenstown and then tootled along and thought, well, we may as well, we don't have to go too far. We still got the kind of joy of Queenstown, 20 minutes up the road. So in Gibbston, you saw some of the early pioneers. So Chard Farm, I should have put the picture of Chard Farm on. If you want a white knuckle ride into a winery, go to Chard Farm, because as you leave the main road, you go on a single track road. So there's the hillside, there's you, and then there's just like a sort of a sheer drop into the river of hundreds of meters. And just as you turn the corner, you'll meet a tour bus coming the other way. So in that funny New Zealand way, like, well, I'm going to know in a minute, but that's sort of hugging the thing. So Peregrine, so David, the glass of wine you've got tonight comes from Gibbston. Chard Farm is there, Brennan is there, Mount Edward is there. So it was sort of a kind of a pioneering area, if you like. Gibbston Valley is there. So that all sets off and is really fun. However, at lunchtime in Queenstown, you often get these sort of noon winds that pick up and whistle up that valley. And so I've been there when we again, my story of my life in these planes. It was such a roller coaster that all the overhead lockers opened, the plane was plummeting up and down, up and down, up and down. So never fly in there at lunchtime. That's all I can say. Early morning, late night, early morning, late night. And when we looked in the vineyards, it stripped all the leaves off and what have you. So Gibbston, in a good year, Gibbston, I think, is the most mesmerizing of all the regions, because it's cool, but obviously, again, another feature of climate change, it's slightly warmer. And so you get these, and again, vine age would play a part. But when they get it right, I think Gibbston Pinots are absolutely outstanding. So it's perfectly possible to get a single vineyard one. And again, Varley is one of the few wineries who've got vineyards everywhere. So they do a Bannockburn, a Bendigo, a Gibbston, and a Waitaki. So it's quite interesting if you get the chance to see those all together. So Gibbston, but people who planted in Gibbston were up against two things. Number one, people who were attracted, and so they had lots of people who were lots of kind of just say rich American people who realized they could fly in their private jets into Queenstown, because clearly between 1990, when I first went, and now, they've extended the runway and they've got all of those beacons. You're not likely to be smeared into the side of the side of a mountain. So people could fly in their private jets, and they zipped along and built all these kind of mega mansions and bits and pieces. And what attracted them to living in Gibbston was, you can see the real estate pictures, live amongst the vines and, Pinot Noir on your doorstep, which they all loved until they actually lived there. Then they find out that wineries, have helicopters for frost. They have harvesters that work and make a noise. They have floodlights, doing this, that, and the other. And there was a great to-do, about actually, it's very nice to live amongst vineyards, providing they don't actually work, if you know what I mean. So the Gibbston people, they had that wobble with kind of climate and whatever. So you often find now that wineries that are in Gibbston have expanded and either take fruit from the slightly warmer places to bolster, so even though Mount Edward is based in Gibbston, it would get most of the fruit for its regular label from other places, a bit like blending in champagne to get you more complexity and even out of season. You couldn't in the past rely on Gibbston being the place to grow it, so that would explain it. So once you leave Gibbston, you start to go through that gorge, beautifully scenic. You can obviously stop off at the Currow Gorge and bungee. So New Zealand's longest established bungee. Just stop there for a minute, pay 150. I think it's $150, maybe 200 now. And jump and be popped into the Currow River for a bit. Off you go again. You go down. You go past. So between Gibbston and Cromwell, which you see to the right, the area is famous because of gold panning. So in the Victorian times, they discovered gold in the hills, if you like, in the sluicings. And if you look at lots of Centro Otago wines, they are named after, or their names are maybe things to do with gold panning or mining. So wine's called the sluicings. You've got Target Gully and Long Gully. Well, they were claims, if you like. So I cannot imagine how extreme life must have been there were lots of Chinese people who came out, but you can imagine that in the summer up in those hills, it would have been, boiling, and in the winter it would have been freezing. I can't begin to imagine how extreme that climate was, but that's, and you can still see the little stone cottages, little derelict or falling down bits as you go along. So it's super pretty, but a great history is there. The town you get to in the middle is Cromwell. So Cromwell, you can see in the white word at the bottom of Lake Dunstan. So between leaving Queenstown and getting to Cromwell, you've probably dropped about 150 metres. Now that doesn't sound a lot, but it is a lot in viticultural terms. So not only is it warmer and lower lying, but it's kind of surrounded by hills. So you might see people refer to the area as the Cromwell Basin, because it literally is a warm sort of shelter basin that sits in the bottom. The fame of Cromwell was that if you look at the town, which is the white lettering, directly north of it, it says Lake Dunstan, and Lake Dunstan is man-made. So if you follow the lake down, it goes through Cromwell, and then you can see it going down sort of off at 5 o'clock off the picture. This is the Clutha. So that is the mighty Clutha is a huge hydroelectric power station. And so they dammed up, or they created a man-made lake to feed into the hydroelectric station, which, if you're a lover of apricots, as I am, is a tragedy, because apparently the bit they flooded was where some of the best stone fruit in New Zealand came from, because it's famous for cherries, particularly. If you speak to people down there who have viticultural companies, then the big fight is between grapes and cherries, and the cherry people will pay tons more. So the Cromwell, I don't know, you tell me, I'm not a cherry grower, but apparently people in Asia and China, they like cherries that are quote crunchy. They don't want those dribbly ones where you end up with it all running for chin. And the climate and the extreme climate gives you these beautifully precise cherry flavors that still have a sort of crunch to them, and they're exported. So per hectare, cherries, I think last time I heard, was like $275,000. A hectare is the value of the fruit off them. So there's a kind of push and pull. But when they flooded the lake, they took in they moved some of the older buildings. You can go to Old Cromwell now and see them all in a line, as sort of a tourist destination. But they asked the people of Cromwell, we're taking some of the greatest orchard fruit in New Zealand, and we're flooding it and we're using some of your houses. What would you like in return? And I never fail to be amazed by how stupid people are. And they said, what we'd like is a shopping centre. So go figure, in the centre of Cromwell is the ugliest little shopping, it's not even a shopping centre, it's sort of a motley collection of shops around a sort of a walkway. It's just horrible. And I think there might be a Subway there now. And then on a pole, they've got these famous plastic fruit. So there's a great big pole, and it's got like a peach, I think an apricot. There's no grapes, which is always the absolute, tragedy of the whole place. But it's in percentage terms, Cromwell is the fastest growing town in New Zealand. Obviously it's tiny, but in percentage terms, why is that? Because people have been forced out of Queenstown. So the tourism in Queenstown, people Airbnb-ing their homes, not renting them to people working there, overseas. I think before COVID, 1 person in 10 working in Queenstown came from Brazil. There was like a free trade agreement, and people could work there. So they had all these people coming to Queenstown to work, enriching the entire, culture of the region. And I taught a group of WSET students, and one little girl, it was awful. She said to me, she said that there were 3 of them in one bed, and she said, I don't like to be on the late shift, because when I get home I end up squashed in the middle. But I thought, it's pretty sad, isn't it, when you're working, and probably long hours in hospitality, you have to go home and share a bed with hundreds of other people. So what has that meant? It's meant that people have gone for inexpensive things. So Cromwell, you have to go through Cromwell if you want to go to Christchurch. So the main road from Queenstown takes you through the gorge to Cromwell, and then you'd go up that right hand side of the river where it's got Northburn and Bendigo, and then the road you can see goes out at sort of like 1 o'clock out, and then that goes to the Lewis Pass and out to Christchurch. So Cromwell's quite important. It's still a small town, but it's a rapidly expanding town, obviously drawn by the allure of the shopping mall. But anyway, it's formed a sort of hub. So in Cromwell, there's a Central Otago wine company, so Cowco, and there's the other one called Vinpro. So what you've got in Central are quite a lot of people who've gone in to grow Pinot Noir, small, like mum and dads. They thought, we'll have a little vineyard and we'll do bits and pieces, but I need somebody to make the wine. So within Cromwell, you've also got a sort of industrial estate where Dean Shaw makes the wine at Cowco, and Pete Bartle makes it at Vinpro. So often you'll see the 2 names. So Dean Shaw is famous because he makes the Sam Neill wine, which is called 2 Paddocks. So that's his most famous customer, if you like. But the Cromwell acts as a centre. There's all sorts of bits of industry and things going on there, but it's also the home for the thing. If you go just south of Cromwell, and it's probably 15 minutes, if that, in a car, then you end up in a place called Bannockburn, and Bannockburn has some of the most famous of Central's wineries. So you'd see things like Felton Roads on that road, Mount Difficulties on that road, the Terra Sancta, we don't talk about them very much because we don't like them, along there. Domain Road is all based in Bannockburn. So on the other side of the river, when you go there, you leave Cromwell and it says on the big sign, heart of the desert, because it is classed as a desert once you get here. The rainfall is so low that it's by anybody's standards, it is a desert or semi-desert. So, obviously that only adds their pioneering spirit. So we'll have a look at Bannockburn a little bit later on. And then not forgetting that I can't see it because I saw that bar underneath, but if you follow the Clutha River down, you get to Alexandra. And Alexandra often in New Zealand would be the hottest in the summer and the coldest in the winter. So there are wineries down there. So Last Chance, which is one of the Sam Neill vineyards, is there. There's one called Grasshopper Rock, which I think is distributed in Australia by, who is the alum? Are they called Samuel Smith? Is there a distribution, a brewery called Samuel Smith or something like that? Okay, goes through them. So it's kind of a little bit away, but I would imagine, well, that's actually not true. There was a man who set up his winery there called Black Rock. And he, as my mother would have said, is as nutty as a fruitcake. And he, in England, I worked for in the centre of London, in Belgravia, and we imported fine Burgundy and the great French wines. And you weren't allowed to go to a tasting unless you were, obviously a girl. I had to go in a skirt, I couldn't go in trousers, etc., etc., all very fine. And so when we came here for the very first time in 1990, I went to Chard Farm because Jonathan knew the people who owned it. And I remember thinking, well, firstly, I thought they'll never make a go of this because the wine was execrable. It was like drinking, like sometimes when people change colour of wine, you have a little tiny bit of red wine left in your glass and somebody brings out a Chardonnay and you think, oh, I'd like to try that. So you pour water into your glass to rinse it out and you get a sort of barely coloured water. Well, that's what it tasted. It looked like. I was like, well, this is just tragic. They'll never make this work. And Verdon was there, and he had a little fire going and like a 100-year-old tin sitting on it. And in it looked like roadkill. There was just, I don't know what it was. There was some sort of carcass, which I think could have been a rabbit for all I know. And I remember thinking to myself, oh, we don't do this like this in London. Anyway, I think it was rabbit and apricots. I didn't eat very much of it because I think the fur was still on it. Anyway. But he then decided that the only place for humans to be was, I think, on the moon. And so he built a rocket, which he was going to fire himself into outer space. But so the local legend goes, he got it all wrong. And rather than catapult himself into outer space, he just blew an enormous hole in the front garden. It's like an epic crater. And his wife left him. And then I don't know what's happened to him now. I think it's all, moral of the story. Stick to making wine, maybe space exploration. We leave to others, maybe. So don't forget Alexandra, that's down on the right-hand side. If you come back up into Bannockburn and into Cromwell, then the road kind of divides and you can take the right side. So Northburn and then Bendigo, and as I say, that would go out through Terrace and out to Christchurch. So Northburn is a relatively new sub-region. It's famous because there's a kind of a family that have been there since Victorian times. They own, the typical thing, I suppose the same in Australia, 20,000 hectares of sheep country there. And they decided to have a winery, but they were very nice people. They just couldn't really seem to make it work. But Northburn was bought by Cloudy Bay. So Cloudy Bay wanted the Pinot Noir from Central Otago, and I think it's now called Tawahi, which is, the luxury one that comes in the big box, and, it's all very opulent. So Northburn, there's other things happening around there. And then Bendigo, which is north of there. Again, Bendigo would be it's sub-region in its own right, famous in the past for being basically rearing sheep. So Bendigo Station is a massive sheep station there. And when we went there, the people who own it now, who are ancestors of the original people, apparently they just, you know, Victorian times, there were a couple of friends walking along, and one said, look, I'll be here and this way, and you be here and that way. And so they basically divided Central, and the Perriams all went, you know, with 20 billion hectares one way, and the other people went the other way. That was the end of it. It's famous for the sheep that they lost for hundreds of years. Do you remember when they found it, they called him Shrek the sheep? He was just like, he'd never been shorn for sort of 10 years. So he was like this ginormous ball that had emerged from the hills. So it's famous. And when I talked to them, apparently when they get the sheep, if they kind of shear them and then they sort of tickle them, and then they have a little comb and they kind of like comb the hair on their tummies. And it's such a fine thing that apparently they, the Queen's underwear, well, obviously she's no longer with us, but, you know, the vest and all the merino that's the sort of, you know, next to your skin is from there. And people pay on the, you know, the auction prices millions of dollars for this stuff because it's such high quality. So it's predominantly sheep. And so I always think of their little hairy tummies just being all the little, it's a bit like, what are those things? Those kind of cashmere goats and, you know, mohair and stuff like that. Anyway, but nowadays it's quite warm. So Bendigo, the people who owned the land there made a subdivision there. So there would be people like Quartz Reef. The Gibson Valley people have got a vineyard there. Prophet's Rock are there. Folding Hill are there. You get really quite a distinctive character coming from Bendigo because it's warm. So you get much. So if you can contrast it between Gibson, which is that much lighter, higher toned, red fruited, acidity driven, then by the time you get to Bendigo, you've probably got alcohols that are slightly bigger, maybe 13.5, 14, but you get a much darker fruit profile and you get much more dominant tannins. So like I say, people like that style of wine, but it is definitely a character that comes from there. And there were, I think Craggy Range went in the Mud House, which is the owned by
I think we lost Jane. Hopefully she'll come back.
second-hand thing, and she'll be phoning up for washing instructions. That's the only thing she does. She phones me up and says, I bought this, insert something, can I wash it? I'm like, no, you can't, take it to dry cleaners. So that's Bendigo. If you were to come back down the side of the lake, all the way down to Cromwell, and then go up the left-hand side, that's the road that takes you up to Wanaka. So all the way along there will be Lowburn, Parkburn. There's a big argument. Is it Pisa or Pisa? I think we call it Pisa, but that's on the other side. So again, you've got people like Amersfield is there, Pisa Range is there. There are a number of people, you know, who've explored. I'm trying to think who the people are I'm thinking of that are up there. Oh, he's French. Domaine Rewa is there as well. So those are probably, they don't have the necessarily the profile of the other side. Because if you think about it, you know, the sun is setting north, the sun is setting in the west. So you've got the heat, all the afternoon sun is hitting that right-hand side, you know, Bendigo, Northburn, aiding ripening. But it's important anyway. And then as you go through Pisa, then you go up through Queensbury, and then you'd end up in Wanaka. So there are two ways to get to Wanaka. One is to, as I said, that long way, all the way into Cromwell, then all the way up the left-hand side, and then all the way and up that way, or from Queenstown, where the word Cowra River is, the R, you can then climb up and over. They call it the Crown Range, and it takes you up over the mountains. Then you drop into Wanaka, so the ski fields are up there. So you either life in your own hands up and over the mountain, or you take the much longer. It's a bit like a 3-4-5 triangle, isn't it? You can go the hypotenuse or 3-4-5. And so in Wanaka, the famous The reputation really of Wanaka is through Ripon. So Ripon's one of the leading producers in New Zealand. They're the one, when you see the photos where there's all the vines going down to the lake, and then there's like a sort of small island in front of you. The Mills family have been there since the middle of the 1800s. They own this beautiful land, and the son Nick and his wife Jo, who now own the property, they are fastidious. So they've still got vines that were planted by Nick's parents, which are on rootstock. So you have to obviously be careful when you go there, but they're biodynamic. They're very philosophical. They make wines that probably don't necessarily look too ostentatious when they're first released, compared with all the other styles, the bigger, richer ones that come from other places. But they definitely, they've, with time in the cellar, they're amazing wines. So, and then people like Akitu have gone in there. Maud, so Sarah Kate and Dan Deneen, he was the winemaker at Tower Estate, which I think is in the Hunter. And they've got in there as well. So if you think about it, because of the spread of geography, because of the slightly different aspects, I would say the wines from Wanaka, Gibbston, Bendigo, Bannockburn, and Alexandra, you should be able to see clear, distinct differences based on elevation, not saying soil type, but where they are, the rainfall bits and pieces, whatever they are, and they've really played to that. And I think they've been, well, we saw the Pinot in 1990, so what's that, sort of nearly 45 years ago. God, it can't be that long, Jane. 35 years ago. Christ, I'm aging as I sit here, aren't I? Another 10 years of my life. But I think they've really only got one grape variety. There's some Gamay planted there, some poor sausage to go with Syrah, believe it or not. There's some Riesling and some really quite beautiful Chardonnay there now. But really, they have focused their entire attention onto Pinot. So I don't think it's any surprise that we're seeing these regional characters or sub-regional characters come out, I would suggest. Right, sorry, I've kept going on. Poor old William's here on his own, probably thinking, wow, it needs some leaven the load. But can we just have 5 minutes? Do you mind? I can go and have a wee and a cup of tea.
Absolutely.
That'd be all right, love. Right, I'll be back in 2 seconds.
See you soon.
All right, love. That one off. And where's my picture? I can't work out how to turn off my camera. Ah. Sorry, as I anticipated, if I made a pasta bake on Monday, Mum, can I eat it on Thursday? I don't know what is going on, but anyway, yes, make sure it's heated all the way through and you'll be absolutely fine. But oh, you can't believe it, can you? Anyway. So where am I? Oh, I'm there. All right. Sorry. We'll have a look at the next one, see what else is pootling on. I put some photos on. Okay, so that gives you a clue. That's Prophet's Rock. So without some irrigation or some taming of the land, you would see that there's incredible hard line between viticulture at the front and then behind, which is just these sort of impenetrable rock faces with sort of scrubby bushes on them and what have you. So I can imagine when you look at the extreme climate that is central, when you think about, Mount Difficulty is called Mount Difficulty because it was so hard to get the sheep up and over it. It really was an extreme climate, but suddenly they must think, wow, there's suddenly vineyards and bits and pieces going on there. So that's one. So they're, as I say, they're up in Bendigo, which shows you I don't know what the next one is. I think I must have another picture. Oh, okay. Now that I am standing here kind of between Northburn and Bendigo, and I'm looking across Lake Dunstan, and then I'm seeing the hills in the background. And I actually think this is quite a sad, this isn't the sad picture. The sad picture is a bit further on. Somebody's actually manually terraced the vineyard, which I actually think is atrocious. I don't think you should be able to do that. I think you should just, you shouldn't be able to cut into a natural feature just to make this stepped vineyard, which I think looks horrible. But you can see the delineation of the snow line. You can see how extreme it is there. That's obviously going into autumn. And then you see the reflection of the lake, obviously is ripening. But that is, so if the road that you can see at the bottom, which is right down by the lake going right, that takes you up to Christchurch, going left takes you down to Cromwell. But that'll be looking over at that kind of Lowburn, Parkburn side of the landscape. Where is that? That's Mount Difficulty. So that's where you see there. So again, you see that massive difference between the rolling hills, which are, just barely supporting sheep and some little scrubby bushes, but no trees really growing. And then down in the bottom where people have terraced, benefit of irrigation, and they have created these kind of beautiful little vineyards or viticultural areas by basically picking sheltered spots or flatter spots or whatever. But you don't have to travel far in central to suddenly be in kind of the wild, if you like. I'm not sure what, it's like a surprise, like Christmas, isn't it? What's coming up next? So key varieties, you can see there, a bit like Marlborough was heavily reliant on Sauvignon Blanc, then you see here Pinot is the great variety of choice. And again, most regions in New Zealand grow Pinot Gris, and all the aromatics down here seem to work super well. So you've got that much lighter fruit profile, much higher acidity, much more taut. The really exciting one, I think, is Chardonnay, because again, in the past, the Chardonnays could have been a little bit on the oaky side, shall we say, but when you look now at the use of oak, the kind of whole bunch, I would suggest nowhere near the level of reduction that you see from places like Marlborough or Hawke's Bay, but older oak barrels, bigger format oak, really some beautiful Chardonnay coming out of Central, and then Riesling again works well. And then I think there's a bit of Sauvignon, just because people who want a wine list that features just regional wines, and it's quite nice to have something, on there that's local. But it's only 2%. Not many people really bother with it. It's a sort of go to a restaurant. Some people have got it on the list, but there's not people don't rush to you shouting, "I have a glass of Central Otago Sauvignon." Particularly, and then so obviously Pinot is there in the picture if you prefer it that way. So in Central Otago, so the most southerly wineries in the world, an inland continental climate. So you're far away from the equator. So we know, don't we, from our WSET lectures, that if you're far away from the equator, the angle of incidence of the sun travels further. So you're going to have to do something with your vineyards to make sure that you maximize ripening. So most vineyards are planted on a slope of some sort. It may not be a particularly steep slope, but it is on a slope. That also helps with frost protection. So frost would be a problem in central, because obviously you know that without the moderating influence of the sea, then obviously you're I mean, obviously New Zealand people are very proud of it. They'll say things like, oh, it snowed on Boxing Day, as though that's something to be admired. And I'm always like, oh yeah, thinking, well, it does snow on Boxing Day. Well, it snows on Boxing Day where I come from in the Northern Hemisphere, but here they take it to be a sort of like a fun thing. It is dry, so it is really a desert. So, you know, lowest rainfall. So when you think about it, if you left Queenstown, how can I sing this? If you left Queenstown and you went to Wanaka, then from Wanaka you'd go over the Alps and then you'd be on the west coast. Well, if you did that and got to the west coast to Haast and turned left, then you would follow the coastline down till you got to the Fiordland National Park. Well, Fiordland is one of the rainiest places in the world. So 8 meters of rainfall a year in Fiordland, up and over the Southern Alps, and then you're into a desert. Look, you know, I think 450 for the year and then 300 during the growing seasons. So you go from one of the wettest places on earth to a desert. You know, obviously it takes you a long time to drive there, but there are scenic flights every day, probably take you 40 minutes, you know, little tiny plane to whip over. You get that there's very little pollution, there's very little industry down there. So you get these long sunshine hours. So in the summertime, there was a fascinating thing on yesterday, a picture or diagram yesterday showing you a line across New Zealand of when it goes to dusk. So, you know, the timing. So we are in dusk here in Auckland by maybe 7:30, but in Queenstown it's probably not dusk tonight until 9 o'clock. So they get these very, very long days, hot, incredible intense UV during the daytime, but then freezing cold at night. So it would not be unusual for it to be, say, 30, 32 during the daytime, and then everyone takes a jumper when they go out in the evening. You're like, why are they taking a coat? Well, you know why. When the sun bobs down, you're frozen. But what it does mean is, we talked about, didn't we, the UV and the diurnal shift means that drives anthocyanin production. So you normally can see Central Otago Pinots will have a really quite, not a purple colour, but they will have a level of colour. I'm always surprised in Australia about how pale the Pinots are, or that to me they look quite advanced for their age. But here we get the really bright colours. And then obviously the schist soils you see here, low vigor, so we wouldn't expect to see big canopies. It's quite kind of hard work growing the grapes here. Windy, we've talked about that as well, but free draining soils, which is benefits obviously irrigation we have here. The slightly cooler Gibbston Valley. Don't put Gibbston Valley, put Gibbston. And one of the regions displayed clean. Well, yeah, this is, I'm sorry, I always just think this is rubbish. I think you could go around every single producer in Central Otago, and each of them is going to have a different philosophy. So you're going to go from people who are making wines that, you know, are not that expensive, relatively, you know, ready for drinking. You could go to Jen Parr, who makes the wines for Varley, who is a massive believer in whole bunch, because she believes that if you've grown grapes and you're using the skins to give you colour and tannin and the flesh to give you the sugar to ferment, why wouldn't you use the stems? The stem is part of the bunch, so therefore you're only enhancing vineyard character if you use the stems. So there are people who are definitely using the whole cluster. There are people who don't think it works particularly well at all, so they will be, you know, removing the stems. The big, I think, evolution. So I moved here in 2000, and in 2002 they had a really good vintage. And we went to the release tasting down, so it'd be maybe 2003. And Max Allen came from Australia, and he was saying to them, oh, you know, these are profound wines, the colours are amazing, you know, rich and whatever. Now, when we look back on it and with time, you probably think, well, the reputation of Central was almost based on those wines looking a bit like Merlot. If we're brutal now, they were, you can imagine, compared to somebody who's been used to like scraggy, overpriced Burgundy, which looks sort of thin and astringent and slightly grippy tannins. And then suddenly you got this Pinot Noir from the Southern Hemisphere, which was sort of luxurious and maybe 14% alcohol and had a bold color. They must have thought this is much lovelier. But those, I think, styles of wine have really, there are a couple of producers who still chase that kind of generousness. But I think the alcohols would now sit 13 and a half, red fruited characters, much less oak than you've seen in the past, maybe some whole cluster. The other thing which can't be underestimated is that Paul Pujol, who is the winemaker at Prophet's Rock, did a harvest at Comte de Vogüé in Chambolle-Musigny. And he's become firm friends with the winemaker, a guy called Francois Millet, who's now retired, a more taciturn person. If you can get a word out of him, you're doing well. He's very laconic, has a great sense of humor, but he always sort of pauses in that French way. So somebody will say something, he'll just kind of freeze them with a glance and then say, that kind of thing. Anyway, he comes out here and he makes the wine with Paul called Cuvée aux Antipodes. And not only does he come out here to make wine from Central Otago fruit, but he has been imparting his winemaking knowledge. So I would say that he's been super influential in punching down or plunging techniques. So that for a bigger, fuller-bodied wine, we probably plunge, like Cabernet maybe every 8 hours or something like that. But he maintains that the less you work the cap, the more you get the vineyard expression. So his technique is to only plunge once. That gets the cap down into the fermentation, and off it goes, and then usually just pushes like a watering can or a bucket through the cap, and then we'll pull the juice up and then water the cap with it. So because he said to me, I said, how often do you plunge? And he said, once. And I said, well, once a day. And he said, no, once a harvest. And I'm like, wow, that is hands off. And people have liked what he's done with the fruit. So you see he's working with Paul at Prophet's Rock, but there's a guy called Steve Davies who's got a winery called Doctor's Flat, which is just up the road, awesome wines. He does it as well. So I'd say that the Central Otago winemakers, there are always going to be people, as I say, who go for that slightly more honky end of the street. But I would say there's a lot more sensitive winemaking, a lot less oak, more whole cluster, more kind of sensitive winemaking, if you like. But maybe, for those inexpensive wines, they still, make it old school. But what else have we got? Have we got anything else? Is that it? I can't tell where I am. Oh, and then wineries. Okay, so wineries we talked about. So in the top tier, you probably got Prophet's Rock, who've got Pinot Riesling, arguably New Zealand's greatest Pinot Gris, because Paul also worked in Alsace, or as he refers to it, Alsace, which I don't actually think that's how it's pronounced, but I don't want to correct him on that one. So Felton Road. So Felton will be the one that's got the highest profile. So they were, and anyone who's studying wine business should say to themselves, wow, if we've got a winery that people know the name of, why don't we just call them Block 1, Block 2, Block 3? It's simple. There's no stupid names. They're not named after somebody's spaniel or, or something that means something to the winery that means absolutely nothing to anybody else. But, the blocks, so they're obviously biodynamic. They've got the people who've worked there for a long time, and really quite sensitive now. So they are super reticent wines, the Felton Roads. They're very, when you have them in a lineup, they can look quite understated, but with time. And he's experimenting with Riesling. So they've made everything in the past from a sort of a Mosel Cabernet style, if you like. And then the one that I like best from the last release was a sort of slightly more like a dry, almost like a dry, like a Grosser Gebäck, like a dry, weightier expression. So that's super fun. We've talked about ripping up at Wanaka. So again, it's an embarrassment of riches, isn't it? This for some of the places like Gisborne, we've had to ferret around looking for stuff, but here we're overwhelmed. The Dicey wine. So the Dicey's, or Matt Dicey was the winemaker at Mount Difficulty for years, and his father and his brother have a viticultural business. And then when the Mount Difficulty was sold to Foley Family Vineyards, so another American billionaire, they created wines on their own. So if you look for them now, Dicey is making things like Chenin Blanc, Riesling, and bits and pieces, and they've just tried their hand at bottling premium Pinot in a 2-litre box, which is really, I think, quite exciting. So, here in New Zealand, we still have that whole, crappy wine in wine boxes mentality, but instead of going for 3 litres, they've gone for 2. And the footprint of the box is really quite small. So it doesn't look, you can get it in the fridge. Well, not that you put Pinot Noir in the fridge, but I suppose you could if you wanted to make sure it didn't degrade. But they experimented with that, and I think they've just put a Pinot Rosé into the box, because their argument is, people who are going camping or, caravanning or whatever, you can just slide this box in. So that's showing you, innovative happenings in Central. Grasshopper Rock, can't help but love. They make one wine, down in Alexandra. They're awesome people. They don't charge very much money for the wines. They're super normal. They're made by Pete Bartle at Vinpro, but look for those. He's awesome stuff. Farley, we've talked about. So they're always one of the most exciting wineries to get their new releases, because they do their own. They do a Pinot, and then they do Bendigo, Bannockburn, Waitaki, Gibbston. And it's the best way to see those different characters across the 4 wines, to see different bits and pieces going on. So I like those wines a lot. They've made, unfortunately, skin contact Pinot Gris. Yikes. It's a bit of a shame, but the real McCoy. But they make other beautiful, Pinot Gris from there and whatever. So I think they're ones to watch. Then that's freed up the owner, Grant, so he can go up to Waitaki and make his Chardonnay in his beloved region. Gibbston were one of the hero ones. So Gibbston have been going for probably 30 or 40 years. And they've got a bunch of investors now. So they've got a cheesery. Is that even a word? I don't know. And because they're on that main road going through the valley, then they've got a big restaurant. They've almost turned themselves into a kind of tourist destination. They've got new accommodation alongside. So it's all very glamorous now. You can buy, houses that sit alongside it. They have concerts there. They have somebody's blasted into the rocks. And it goes about 50 meters in, so it's, you can go in there. I think they're going to try and make sparkling wine. Must have given up and thought, I can't be bothered doing this anymore. So do you know what I mean? It's kind of, people stop, they get off the bus, they taste some wine, they buy some cheese, they have some fun times, then get back on the bus. Wine tourism. Maud, we've talked about in Wanaka, and then on the other side, some of the newer one, well, not newer, Chard Farm, which is awesome. Quite a quiet winemaker, so you don't often see them out there, but make great wines and single vineyard wines. 2 paddocks owned by Sam Neill. So obviously great wines coming out of there. Burn Cottage I love. So he's called Marquis Sauvage, or Marcus, I presume you call him. He's a spectacularly wealthy guy from Chicago who looks like he should have been in the Grateful Dead. So he's got this like weird mullet hairdo, covered in tattoos, always has some t-shirt, the nicest man you could meet. So Burn Cottage has got the winemaker Claire used to be at Martin Vineyards. They're super into biodynamics. They're super into, these great wines that they make a Pinot Noir. They make a moonlight race. So obviously, a water race, which is probably how they were sluicing. They make a weird wine, a Grunewald Riesling blend. Go figure. And importantly, they swap fruit with barley. So barley makes a burnt cottage wine, and burnt cottage makes a barley wine. So you can see the same fruit, fruit handled by different winemakers. So then they have these amazing labels, which are sort of I can't think of who the person is, not Goethe. It's someone weird and wonderful. So they're very arresting labels anyway. So look for burnt cottage. Doctor's Flat, we've talked about. One wine, Steve makes it in a shipping container. So you don't see it often around, but it's awesome stuff. I can't help but love the people from Judge Rock, because they try their hand at anything. They've got weird Austrians. So they've got Saint Laurent, for example. You'd have to think that that's a pretty tough ask, but they're lovely people. So I only ever buy wine from people I think are lovely. Even if they make great wine, if I think they're toads, I don't buy it. Tucano are really, 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 really rich people who've bought vineyards, and their tasting room is opposite Felton Road. So if you come to Cromwell, you certainly don't want to eat in blooming Cromwell. That would be like, oh dear, oh Lord. No, that wouldn't be a very good look at all. But if you drive south, then you can go to the Bannockburn Hotel, which is really quite lovely, like a pub, and there's a brilliant wine list. And then if you turn right and go along Felton Road, there's a whole load of places that you can, cellar doors. And Tucano would be one of them. It's all very designer. And the winemaker, Dave, is the one who's leading the charge in Waitaki as well now. So that's where the Cabernet Franc comes from. Mount Edward, you can't help but love, because Duncan is, I think, a sandwich short of the full picnic. He really is kind of extraordinary at the moment, but always doing weird things. Made a vermouth, a dry vermouth, which I didn't think was particularly successful, but always doing something. So, he's out there, one of the legacy people. And then the Akitu people, I don't warm to him at all, to be honest with you, but they make nice wine. So Maud are making his wine, so he's got a couple of them. Oh, he probably means well, but just one of those people I always think, well, yikes. But there are lots and lots of things happening in Central. There's always, obviously it's pretty tough, and I think for a lot of people they're working out now. It was my dream to have these things. You can see, like, the one that I haven't put on there, and I forget every time, and is almost my favorite wine in the whole world, will be Quartz Reef. I cannot see how I missed those out. I probably had a rush of blood today. The sun came out today, so obviously, please excuse, I had a touch of sunstroke with the actual seeing the sun for the first time. Though I have to say, between you and me, it wasn't all that flash in Sydney last week, was it? No, it was not. So Quartz Reef are up in Bendigo, and they make, I think, one of New Zealand's premium sparkling wines. So they said their philosophy was, if you went out and said to somebody, should we have a glass of sparkling wine, champagne, what's the best one? Most people would say Comte from Taittinger. So they've bought the same bottle. They make a Blanc de Blanc sparkling wine, which is it's awesome. They make a normal method just, but they make this as well. They make great Pinots. They've got Pinot Gris. They're super lovely people. So Rudy, who is their winemaker, is Austrian, and he grows some Gruner as well. And he was friends with the lady from Champagne. That provoked the conversation about making sparkling wines years ago now. But I can't believe I haven't put them on there. But anyway, you should buy those, because they're lovely people, lovely wines. That's always a bit of a giveaway, isn't it? I would say. But I think in Central, some of the other regions moan and groan, Central Argo, Pinot, whatever. But they do a lot of work. So they invite all the young sommeliers from New Zealand to go in the middle of winter, and they do fun things like they go, curling, where you hit like a puck on the ice, and they do releases, and they kind of drive the whole thing. They don't just sit there waiting, saying, oh, we make great wine, well, somebody's going to buy it. And I think some of the other regions like Marlborough could probably take a leaf out of their book, and say, actually, there's lots of people barking for attention. You've got to be the one that they hear or reference. How can we do that? Well, they do, they have the Central Otago Pinot Noir celebration. They haven't had that for a few years now, but they're always doing something, or they're very collaborative, I think. Well, apart from the one we'll talk about. You know, there's no one. I mean, even if you look at people like Quartz Reef, Chard Farm, Felton Road, Ripon, who were there, the winemakers are probably in their kind of late 40s, early 50s. It's not like the legacy places like Hawke's Bay, where, you know, you've had winemakers, all companies there that have been there for a certain, like Tomato, who've been there for a certain period of time and therefore think they're the legacy. Then there's the new people, then there's the very new people. Central kind of all boomed in one go. So there's still that sort of collaborative approach to winemaking. Is that it? Have I got a final picture? Is that the last one? Oh my God, it's finished of it. Now, William, this is the moment when you have to ask all the questions you've been saving up for the last 4 weeks.
I am.
You haven't got
the
any.
more studying. Yeah, I haven't been to the week.
Turn your sound down. I can't hear you, love. It was off. No, click it again.
Okay.
Turn
Better?
up.
Volume up? Is it low?
See, I'm not alone, David. Neither William or I can make this thing work. It's just hopeless, isn't it? We're easy sending pigeons.
Is it better?
Can you hear him, David? You have to turn yours off and translate for me from William.
You have a question, William?
I can't hear either of you now. You're
I
both carrying a conversation with each other, and I'm stuck here on my own.
David, you probably muted.
Oh, let's do it some other way next time. I'm feeling quite stressed out by this.
Anyway, I've been to Queenstown numerous times, but never had an opportunity to meet these wineries. That was actually before I started enjoying New Zealand wine. But definitely I will make a dedicated trip. Yeah, not at those during the tourist season, but yeah, different season, maybe a little warmer days. Yeah.
Yeah, if you get a chance to go, it's fantastic. Wine regions. Jane's, yeah, I can't look very well. All right, so Jane Williams mentioned he hasn't had a chance to go to New Zealand, but he's very interested in exploring a lot of the wineries and vineyards there. But I have a quick question for you. But a comment that you made, I think 1 or 2 weeks ago, in regards to the current state of New Zealand wine. Do you still believe that New Zealand should just really focus and maintain its identity of producing one of, I suppose, the world's most iconic Sauvignon Blancs, and similar to Central Otago, just concentrate on producing and presenting a unique style of Pinot Noir? Or do you think New Zealand should really start to diversify and look at different types of markets and different types of grape varieties and styles of wines? Oh, all right. Oh.
Oh, okay. Stay producing Sauvignon and Pinot.
Yeah.
Stay to what we do. I think there's an argument for Chardonnay, because I think we make awesome Chardonnay. But once you step outside of there, then you just end up being lost, I mean, somebody just won the Albarino trophy, and it was lovely wine, don't get me wrong, but people buy it because it's, maybe something different, or they go to the supermarkets, it's got a gold medal on it or something like that. But overseas, people are, I mean, if you look at most international media, there's a map of the world, there's Australia, and we don't even feature, we've normally been missed off entirely. People don't know where it is. But I think I said, if it wasn't last week, the week before, having gone to that business forum in Christchurch, when they asked people in America, tell me about New Zealand, it was absolutely hilarious. The national bird is the ostrich. They eat weird things. They couldn't think of anyone from New Zealand. They had no idea where it was. It was just extraordinary. So I think that we just have to we could diversify with those grape varieties. So there's no reason why we couldn't make Sauvignon Blanc, in the style we've made it at the moment. But we could, the thing to do with Sauvignon is to make sure that we don't lose the premium positioning, so that we don't want to be making vast quantities of inexpensive wine. Robert Joseph was on Twitter yesterday and said that Mudhouse, which was a New Zealand brand, which is now owned by Accolade, normally the kiss of death for most things, isn't it, when it gets being bought by a great big group, financial group. They've got 3 Sauvignon Blancs. One is Chilean, one is New Zealand, and one, I can't remember where the last one came from. And how exciting that was. And I'd like to say I'm kind of an easygoing kind of person, but we arrived into Gatwick from New Zealand last year, about to fly to Greece, and I took it back. It said on the wine list, Mudhouse Sauvignon. I poured myself a glass, and we were the Premier in Gatwick, so I appreciate this wasn't, the Hilton. But I went back up to the guy behind the bar and I said to him, I'm sorry, how long has that bottle been open? And he said, we've just opened it. I said, it's not very nice. So we got the bottle out of the fridge, and I said, do you mind if I look at it? And it turned out to be the Chilean Sauvignon. Now, you could argue that on the other side of the world, people don't necessarily associate Mudhouse to New Zealand. To them, it might just be another label like any other. But to me, I thought, wow, they're taking a wine, and it was just, if you tasted that and in the back of your mind you thought, oh, it's from New Zealand, you didn't see that it was from Chile, and then you drank it, you'd have thought, oh, that's not very nice, why am I paying a premium for these wines? So I think that, with Sauvignon, you can crop at quite high levels, much higher than many of the other premium grape varieties. So there's no reason why you can't make a lot of wine but make it well. But that appellation Marlborough wine has been set up to protect the brand, which I think is a great step forward. I think, the minute that you put wine into flexi tank, however you promote its credentials and send it offshore, then there's always, what's going to happen to it when you get to the other end. So no, I personally wouldn't be ripping out Sauvignon Blanc and trying to plant something else. I'd be saying, well, this is our, this is what we do particularly well. Therefore, we need to make sure that we hold on to it. And, when I went to Austria, I was kind of surprised to see that things like Gruner could be everything from, you could go into a bar and have it mixed with soda water and have it as a kind of spritz, and you could have it up to, $200 or $300 a bottle. But it didn't seem to affect it because, people were very clear about the levels and the quality system and all the rest of it. Whereas I think in New Zealand, if you're not careful, you just put Marlborough Sauvignon on the label, then you're going to end up with the consumer, there really isn't any difference. There's no, system to delineate quality. I don't think single vineyard wines are necessarily the way to go, but I do think there's a worry which is going to end up, with a bit of a race to the bottom, because, we obviously lost listings when we had that dreadful vintage, which was a shocker in 21, and then 22 wasn't so good. 23 has come back again. quite strongly. But, you know, if you've had your fingers burnt or you've lost your listing because you couldn't supply the wine, and then some Italian Pinot Grigios, for example, has taken the place. And the same thing, I think, for Pinot as well, is, you know, that there's always going to be a space, as there is in any market, for the inexpensive ones. But inexpensive doesn't have to mean poor quality. It can just mean, you know, maybe you don't use oak, maybe you don't, you know, put it in a ginormous heavy bottle. But, you know, having seen the woes of Australia, you know, Australia must have more trained winemakers than anyone else, more talent, more intellectual, you know, property of people who are controlling the wine industry there. And what a doggy's breakfast they've made of Australia at the moment, you know, when you think of, anyway. But so no, I think that they're curios, you know. I went to the cellar door and I got a bottle of Albarino. Well, great news, but I don't think it's the time. No, I don't. I think you have to just, you know, dig deep and focus on what we do. Sorry, it wasn't very upbeat, was it? But there are other countries making cheap wine. Yeah, look at Spain, look at southern Italy, look at bits of California, look at, you know, massive bits of South Africa, you know, Chile, Argentina. There are loads of places you can make inexpensive wine, but I don't think we're one of them.
But
Sorry.
No, not at all. Can you hear me? No, she's William, can you hear me?
Towards them. Now, what I'm going to say to you, because poor old William's all by himself here all the time, is William. Oh, hang on a minute. Hi, William. Hi, Jane. What do you rank Centro-Targo among the other New World Pinots? Oh, well, New World Pinots. Okay, right. William, if you ever mention this to anyone, we will not be friends, okay? So we're friends now. If you mention this, we're not going to be friends. So I have yet to find a Chilean or a South African Pinot that I would willingly shell out lots of money on. I'm sure they're there. Maybe we just get older examples of the wines. Maybe we aren't seeing the greatest. So here we get the Hamilton Russell and stuff like that. It's just not where I would choose to spend my money on South. I think it's too warm in South Africa. And again, in Chile, I just don't like them. I have to say, in my WSET lectures, you know, for 5 or 6 weeks, I wave my pom-poms and yay, wine. But my pom-poms wilt when we have to do Chilean Pinot. I'm always like, oh, it tastes like flat Coca-Cola to me. I don't like it. Anyway. So where does that leave us? That leaves us with Oregon and high-end California, which can be great, but boy, are some of them expensive. You know, there's some great wines, oof, they're expensive. And then, so we're looking across the Tasman. So I think at the bottom end, at the inexpensive end of the market, ours are better than yours, no offense. But I think when you look at inexpensive Australian Pinot Noir, you normally think, oh, yikes, you know, it tastes more like dry red than Pinot. But at the top end, I think it's, okay, again, you mustn't say this, otherwise I will have to have my New Zealand citizenship removed from me. I judged the Global Wine Challenge last week, and I was talking to somebody about a Pinot Noir that I'd had from Tasmania. I think I might have mentioned it, the Giant Steps one. Fatal Shores, I think it's called, or something like that. And they were laughing and they said, oh, I think you judged that wine again, Jane. And I said, well, I wouldn't know what was in the show. And they said, you gave it another high score. And somebody said, oh, you know, is it in there? And they wouldn't tell us, blah, blah, blah. But I thought to myself, wow, I thought that was an arresting Pinot. I really did. I thought that was just extraordinary wine. So I wouldn't like to say that there was definitely, you know, I would choose Australia carefully because I've had some slightly scary ones. As I say, that one that Chris Crawford chose, made by somebody from Tasmania, which I thought was reductive to the point of being faulty. I thought it was horrible stuff. But I think in Central, there's an ease to them. You know, some of those Australian high-end ones are really quite definite. You know, the winemaker's gone for a really form style, whereas I think in Central that they're normally, you don't get people making those super edgy wines, you know, super pushing the envelope. They tend to be, like all New Zealand wine, not safe, but they're kind of polished, and you know, you're not going to buy one, and I don't think in a restaurant you wouldn't order essential wine and think, wow, well, I wasn't expecting that. I think there's probably that and Martinborough are probably my and North Canterbury. See, I'm stuck, aren't I? I'd always buy North Canterbury wine first and foremost because I like it. I like the people. I like everything about it. Apart from those slightly weird low intervention ones, I won't do those. And then I like Martinborough because, as I say, because of the tannins, and I think they're not boldly fruited. So they're often quite interesting. You know, keep going back to them. But I think in terms of Central, there's enough evolution of style. There's enough different things. Like, you know, if I wanted something big and rich, I might go for something like Rockburn, which kind of has championed that style. If I wanted something kind of slightly more reticent, maybe I might go for something like the Doctor's Flat wines. So I think within the region, there's lots of different, you know, different styles. So no, I would say, you know, it's hard to pick a favorite because, but I think just in price, I mean, what's top end? I mean, the Felton Road, not the block wines, but the normal wines, probably about 90 New Zealand. Well, you know, what can I get for $90? Well, nothing. You know, I can't get, what can I get? I mean, the last bottle of Bourgogne Rouge I bought for level 3, a De Monte Bourgogne Rouge, well, $80. I could say it out loud because I can't believe I did it. But for $80, I can get a young, slightly scraggy Bourgogne Rouge, you know, that might be okay with a bit of time in the cellar, but nothing to write home about. If I want to buy a village wine, then I'm up at, you know, 120, 130, 140 before I've even got anything of any fun. Whereas in Central, I can get, for 140, I could get something amazing. It's under screw cap, so I don't have to sit there thinking, you know, oh, lordy, you know, is it going to be covered in TCA or something like that? So I think that's, and I think it's a bit like a safety net. People like them overseas for that very reason, that they're non-scary wines. You know, you're going to open them and think, you know, there's something I wasn't expecting. I think, anyway. My glasses back on, I can't see otherwise. Oh, that's all right, sweetheart. You know, it's all whatever. But what I said to David is, we're obviously not allowed to have people's names and addresses, but I've sent him a document which has got some of the different regional characteristics on. But if you think between now and the exam or finishing the course, oh, I would like to, you know, and answer this question, I'm more than happy for David to give you my email address, and then you can always flick me an email or something and say, oh, by the way, you know, I don't think you explained that very well, or would you like to, you know, could you just refresh it? I know you've got an exam coming up, so if there's something that you ever wanted to ask, I'm more than happy. You know, it doesn't bother me. You know, I've got nothing to hide. It's always fun getting, I quite like getting emails, so I'm not one of those people who hides and an email.
Right.
I would say.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
I can't hear you at all. I can't hear you. No, I'm sitting on a vacuum.
Well, thank you, William, for coming. Any other questions, William? We can pass on to Jane, or anything that you'd like to say.
Hang on. I can't hear you. I can't hear anything. I'm sitting on my own.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. I can't type. So I will love you and leave you, and I will see you when I see you again. William, have a good luck in the exam. I'm expecting you to do very well. And the next time we meet, you'll tell me all about the Pinots you drunk. Right. David, thank you very much, love. We'll see you soon. Take care. Bye.
William, do you have any questions for me? Oh, sorry, you're on mute.
Just like very quick about the not necessarily New Zealand. I mean, CapServe. I'm just changing my I keep it changing. My palate sheet can be with the cap serve. I recently come across a few from China, and I look at the production.
Mhm.
The Chinese cap server production is nearly as big as from Australia this year.
That's correct, yes. A lot of investment, especially for the wine, very length and efforts to that market. China is probably one of the fastest growing as far as consumer going. One thing, China, it's one of the places they've evidence of wine 3.5, 4 years, but obviously the production, like it is today, it's only relatively new. So I think that China will, coming up in the next 30, 40 years, starting to become more premium wines. A lot of the wineries and a lot of companies are investing because it's a lot easier to be able to manufacture a bottle and sell domestic products. And that's probably the first step that they'll get in to before they start then getting more production, getting Chinese markets to start buying more imported wines, even though those people in China at the moment who do drink wine, obviously the imported wines, it's still very much obviously that they choose on brand recognition, etc., and prestige, but wine in China becoming more of an everyday style drink, which is really good to hear. WSET, Wine and Spirit Education Trust, they dramatically increased courses doing in China because of the.
Yeah, I've heard I even told a couple of my friends to try to get the accreditation. But one thing from Australia's perspective, one thing, has the embargo been lifted to Albanese trip or not? Not yet.
Almost.
But from personally, because I wanted it to help, but because of a big gap, we have probably lost the market. Because personally, the people I come across, if they want a cheap wine, they treat the Chilean, Portuguese wine is actually booming. They're cheap, yeah. But Australian wine only Penfolds stands out. Only Penfolds, only Penfolds. But otherwise, those people are drinking. They spend lots of money on Burgundies. Only Burgundies. Burgundy has taken over as number one.
So once again, that's all about the stage and the rarity, etc. And I obviously anything that has a reputation, anything that has a status symbol, trying to do very well in China. Just on from what I've noticed, I've only been there as a tourist. I haven't lived there, but just from my going there, just seeing walking around, especially a lot of Chinese-based and Hong Kong-based communities. Obviously, there's a lot of status symbol with items and bits and pieces and products. So I think that kind of might be the driver. Penfolds obviously got a international reputation for a particular style of Australian Shiraz, and it's a benchmark style. Debatable whether it's the best or not. That's another argument. To put interest in perspective, it's the Australian wine market for the embargo, close to $3 billion. So it's still quite a heavy, smaller than others, but it's amount for wine. Also, that one area in France still produces more wine than the whole of Australia. So quite happy. Yeah. Wine is marketing help and eating, so bounce back. But I agree with really level wines against things such as Chile, Argentina, or other places like that. Probably be best to leave that alone. And Australia probably focus maybe on the more mid-range, slightly premium, ultra premium, like the Penfolds and the Burgundies and all that stuff, because they're fantastic wine. Ultimately, at the end of the day, not everyone spend, you know, $500, $600, $700, $800 every time they drink a bottle of wine. You know what I mean? And the idea get to them drinking maybe 1 or 2 bottles a week, or at least every 2 weeks, at least 80, 90 on that. Fantastic wine from either Australia, New Zealand, a lot of certain French wine, and some US wine. I have to agree with that. Price structure for US wines are pretty exorbitant for what you get. If you do get to try Pinot Noirs, highly recommend it. You pay for them. There's funny wines out there.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Number 5. The connection is not very good, internet speed.
It's not today.
Not today, it's on and off, Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, David.
Very much. Have a great night.
Thank you.